My name is Jojo with the GoJo7 News, always on the go, always working for you. Today I have a special world news report about the U.S. military interventions in Venezuela and the broader Caribbean.
To use deadly force on any unidentified vessel entering TT waters from Venezuela.
We must treat them like the Al-Qaedas of the world because that's how we're hunt down every single one of those narco traffickers with the authorities.
There's some actual indictments.
President Trump, Operation Southern Spear, and then Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the...
Let's imagine that you and I are in a small, single-engine boat in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. You see, I'm actually a narco trafficker. Yes, I'm moving that brick. But you, well, you're just an immigrant catching the cheapest boat out of Venezuela. We are both just trying to navigate an authoritarian regime. And sure, I've definitely broken some laws. Maybe you have too, but does that mean that we're bad people? Just because you're on a drug boat, does it really mean that you deserve to be? Okay, fine. What if I'm Trinidadian, but I was working on a farm in Venezuela? I'm just taking this random boat back to TNT because it was the cheapest and the fastest. I haven't seen my family in months. My mom is probably worried about me. Please, everyone's waiting for me to come home. Just because I'm coming from Venezuela doesn't mean I deserve to... Okay, fine. How about this? What if I am just one of the 1,500 privately owned fisher boats in Trinidad? Marlin, kingfish, red snapper. You want fish curry and roti? I gonna set you up nice. Just because I am in Venezuelan waters doesn't mean that I deserve to... This is going to be a mix of serious reporting where I'm citing where I got this information, what news publications are reporting about this, but I also want to share my own personal experiences and observations living and traveling in the Caribbean this year. I'll try to make it clear what's an undisputed fact and where I got these sources from and what's my own personal observations. But I want to let y'all know right off the bat, I am biased. As I have very deep criticisms of all governments and institutions. I don't like the Democrats, I don't like the Republicans, I am critical of any party with a P in it. I don't agree with the US, I don't like Venezuela, I don't like niggas, I don't like bitches, I don't like nobody. So let's get into it. I'm gonna go through a timeline of events of what has led up to this military escalation. I'm going to talk about Venezuela's response to it. I want to go over the U.S.'s allies in this conflict, or as I like to call the proud house slaves. I want to talk about the broader response from other countries in the Caribbean, South America, and Central America. Then we're going to go back and look at the historical context of this situation. And to conclude this video, I'm going to give my opinion about what I believe to be is the U.S.'s giant extortion plot to steal oil and petrol resources from everyone. From everyone.
In exactly 5 days, we will be $100 billion richer.
So let's go through this timeline of events. I developed this based on a couple of articles from Axios as well as the ASCOA website. January 24th, 2025, one of the first things that this mofo did when he got back into office, Donald Trump signed an executive order that moves the U.S. government towards designating cartels as terrorist organizations. The U.S. government already has tools and resources at its disposal in order to address drug trafficking. There's a variety of criminal charges and sanctions. And I mean, I have even spoken to NYPD officers who have done joint operations in places like Colombia. So, like, why would you do this? So there are tools in place to deal with the cartels. But by designating cartels as terrorist organizations, it broadens the scope of what you can do to those people. It also means that anyone providing material support for cartel members would also be implicated in, terrorism. Material support can include things like a phone card, false paperwork, weapons, money, and even providing lodging. On August 7th, the U.S. increased the bounty for any information leading to Maduro's arrest to $50 million. Nothing says regime change like a $15 million bounty on your head. On the 23rd of August, the U.S. began sending a diversity of weapons down to the Caribbean Sea, with the help and permission of Trinidadian Prime Minister Kamla Besessar. Prime Minister Besessar, or as the Trinidadians like to call her, Auntie Kamla, has given the U.S. permission to use the waters of Trinidad for their military intervention in Venezuela. On the U.S. media side, there was a lot of talk and focus around drug trafficking and terrorism. But from my perspective on the Guyana media side, this was first framed, like the biggest headline was that this was going to help Guyana protect its border from Venezuela's claim over the Essequibo region. So if you don't know, Venezuela has claimed that over 50% of Guyana actually belongs to them, specifically the Essequibo region. On September 2nd, Donald Trump posted to social media a black and white video of a speedboat bursting into flames. Trump said that 11 suspected members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Agua were off, but the administration has not provided any evidence to support these assertions. Then the White House receives a letter from the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, dated for September 6. Maduro is open to speaking directly with Mr. Trump, but the letter was rejected. September 15th, there's the second strike where 3 people were, Again, reporters asked Trump to provide evidence that these people were indeed involved in drug trafficking, and I'm sure he's getting back to them. On September 19th, Trump posts another video of an airstrike. This time, he claims that they offed 3 male narco-terrorists. I don't know why, in this instance, he really wanted us to know that they were male, but okay. On October 3rd, Hexaf announced another one, this time 4 people off the coast of Venezuela. October 14th, another one. Trump said 6 people. On October 15th, Trump authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela. Talk about spooky season. On October 16th, it was announced that the admiral overseeing the Venezuela operations, Southcom Commander Admiral Alvin Hoseley, was stepping down from his position after years of service. Hoseley was reportedly concerned about the legality of the strikes. Apparently, he was moving a bit more cautiously than Hegseth and Trump wanted him to. Personally, I am an ACAB kind of girl, but I do commend Admiral Alvin Hoseley because he knows that the excuse of I was just following orders is not going to hold up in international criminal court. Back when they were trying Nazi Germany, the rules were very, very clear. It doesn't matter if the higher-ups are ordering you to do something. If you know that it is illegal, you can be charged with war crimes. So, Admiral Alvin Hoseley is just a black man covering his ass. He's not trying to get swooped up in these war crimes with Hegseth and Trump. And I think this is a little bit off topic, but you remember when Trump got arrested and he got the mugshot? There was a black man who also got arrested with Trump and all of his cronies. And when all of them made a deal and pled out and paid their bail, they left that black man in the prison. So I feel like people like Admiral Hoseley, like, dip on your citations. You gotta know, these people don't care about you. They will definitely throw you under the bus. That same day, Trump announced a 6th attack on a suspected drug-carrying submarine in the Caribbean. In this airstrike, 2 people were killed, but this was also the first airstrike where we have 2 survivors, one from Colombia and one from Ecuador. And apparently the Trump administration decided that these narco-terrorists should just be sent back to their home country because they wanted to avoid a messy process concerning the legal status. So in what world does the US send terrorists back to their home country because they don't want to do the paperwork? Y'all said these people were terrorists. There was that one guy who said we should treat them like Al-Qaeda, which, in my opinion, he's a little too brown to be talking like that. But to each their own. In what world does the US send Al-Qaeda members back to their home country? If this was really about terrorism and not... October 17th, another one. 3 people offed. 21st of October, the US carried out another airstrike, but this time in the Pacific Ocean. Because mind you, everybody and their mama has been saying, why are y'all focused on Venezuela when most of the drugs come out of the Andes through the Pacific Ocean? So I guess they switched up on us and was like, okay, we'll kill people in the Pacific Ocean too. Fine. So Hexef actually posted a video to social media, but he didn't provide the exact locations of the airstrike. He said it's just somewhere like on the Pacific side of Central America, like all it is over here. And once again, no evidence to prove that these people are actually drug trafficking, but you know, okay. October 22nd, another airstrike in the Pacific, this time 3 people, you know. October 24th, another airstrike, 6 people. October 27th, we have one of the deadliest single-day airstrikes during this U.S. campaign. 14 people gone due to 3 strikes on 4 vessels. No entiendo, porque if Johnny had 3 apples, how is he giving them to 4 people? In this airstrike, we have another survivor. Hexef said that there's somebody out there in the ocean. The Mexican Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard were looking for them, but at this point, they're presumed. Which is so evil. On this day, the U.S. also deployed an aircraft carrier to the Caribbean. An aircraft carrier is like, it's like a city in the ocean. It's basically a military base in the ocean. October 29th, another airstrike in the Pacific, 4 people gone. October 31st, the Washington Post reports that Venezuelan officials have reached out to China, Iran, and Russia to request military assistance. November 1st, there is another airstrike in the Caribbean, this time 3 people gone. November 6th, the Senate Republicans blocked a war powers measure that was aimed at stopping military action. Essentially, this resolution would have stopped Trump from taking military actions unless he explicitly authorized a declaration of war or, a declaration of war was approved by Congress. Because the United States is supposed to have checks and balances. Like, that's what I learned when I was growing up. Later that evening,
this time 3 people were killed.
On social media that there was another
November
airstrike.
19th,
There's another airstrike. November 11th, 2025. The official total is 76 people are gone. 76 family members, 76 human beings are gone. There are 2 survivors, and 1 person is missing, but presumed to be gone. This is the total count that we know of. Hexef and Trump have been very quiet about the details of these operations. They're not even telling, the exact locations of where these are taking place. Every single article that I have read, ABC, Guardian, Axios, they all make it clear to say that this is just what has been announced by the Trump administration. So if it's the 4th strike, they'll say this is the 4th strike announced. Because does anyone really even know what they're doing? So now let's go through Venezuela's response. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has said that the U.S. military operations are to legitimize regime change with the ultimate goal of appropriating Venezuela's petroleum resources. Where's the lie? Maduro also asks that Latin American and Caribbean nations deliver a unified response to what he has called as an escalating U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. Absolutely. Kumbaya. A unified response against the U.S. military. I love it. Ultimately, Maduro says that the Caribbean and Latin America should be a zone of peace. You see, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, he just wants peace. A piece of Guyana land. It's not enough for the Venezuelans to have the largest oil reserves in the world. So for the past few years, Guyana and Venezuela have a border dispute. You see, back when Guyana was a colony under the British government decided to give the Essequibo region to Venezuela. Venezuela had that region for 50 years and then they gave it back to the British. The border dispute was settled years ago. Venezuela agreed to it. And since then, British Guyana became an independent country in the 1960s. And Venezuela didn't care to bring up this border dispute until Guyana started drilling for oil. Now, personally, for me, borders are imaginary. Now, the way Nicolas Maduro explains it, you would think that Guyana was some colonizer that just took over indigenous land, when in fact the indigenous communities that currently live in the Essequibo region identify with Guyana, not with Venezuela. And I know the average Venezuelan is going to fight with me in the comments about this, but honestly, to you, this border dispute is not going to change your everyday life. But to so many Guyanese, particularly the indigenous communities that live in the Essequibo region, this could be devastating. I've just seen so many comments from American leftists and socialists who really want to believe in this dream that Venezuela is a socialist wonderland. And they are attacking Guyanese as if we're colonizers. It's really interesting to me. Like, I feel like that's just as bad as U.S. soldiers who believe that by going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, the United States was liberating the Middle Eastern people and bringing democracy to the Middle East. Like, y'all are falling for the banana in the tailpipe. And there's a lot of people, a lot of international analysts who believe that the only reason why Maduro brought up these border disputes was to help him in Venezuela's most recent presidential elections, which according to Maduro was a successful campaign because he won. But according to international and independent analysts, they said that he lost and the election was rigged with corruption. Maria Corina Machado is a Venezuelan opposition leader who recently won a Nobel Peace Prize for, I guess you could say, like, upholding capitalism in a socialist state. Machado comes from an elite Venezuelan family. She went to boarding school. She's a Catholic conservative. She is on the right-wing side of Venezuelan politics. She is the biggest opposition leader. She got into politics after her family's steel company was transferred from private ownership into public ownership during the Chavez regime as part of the socialist transition. And I want to make this clear because I read a number of articles that the Chavez regime was actually very fair when they transferred major industries and companies from private ownership to public ownership. It's a socialist theory that certain industries like water, electricity, even steel should not be owned by a few individuals, that it should be owned by the public, by the citizens, and regulated by the government. Now, I know I'm not going to convince y'all of socialism in this video, but please, just calm down with the capitalist propaganda, okay? And so it wasn't like Machado's family just like lost their business entirely. They were compensated and they were still able to run their business. They just couldn't exploit factory workers the way that they really wanted to. I have no sympathy for Maduro or Machado. But I do have sympathy for the average Venezuelan citizen because, you know, I'm American. If I was judged based off of the things that U.S. politicians and the U.S. government was doing, I literally could not go to any country. I couldn't go to any single country. And I also am sympathetic to anyone who views Venezuela as a socialist wonderland because in the early 2000s and 2010s, Venezuela literally was that girl on these socialist streets. they were a model for socialism done right. The only problem is that Venezuela relied too heavily on the oil industry. And so when the oil prices went down in 2014, the economy collapsed. And the United States, as we do, we kicked them while they were down. We poured salt in the wound. We introduced sanctions against Venezuela. This led to the inflation rate in Venezuela increasing to over 1,000% by 2018. For context, the inflation rate in the US in 2021 was 4%. In 2012, I was a budding activist, a democratic socialist, and we were all talking about Venezuela as this beacon of hope. But with economic sanctions from capitalist countries like the US, the lack of economic stability due to the reliance on the oil industry, a decline in social welfare, and the death of Chavez in 2013, there was a rise of Nicolas Maduro and with it a very violent regime in Venezuela. My message to American leftists is that the Venezuela we all dreamed of is long gone, and Maduro is not Chavez. So this section of the video, I want to call it the Proud House Slaves, because Attorney General of Guyana, Anil Nanlal, got up on stage at a PPP rally and had a very particular call of action to the Black supporters of a traditionally Indian political party here in Guyana.
They insult you, they call you big batty African, they call you house slaves. They call you the nastiest thing. Well, I want you to tell them that the national hero of this country is Coffee, and Coffee was a proud and upstanding house slave. Nothing wrong with being a house slave.
Here in Guyana, Maduro is seen as a madman because the same way that Maduro says Trump wants control over Venezuela's petrol resources is the same way that Venezuela has masked and armed men shooting at Guyanese soldiers and in some cases election officials because he wants to control Guyana's petrol resources. It's literally the pot calling the kettle black. It's this kind of violent actions and rhetoric from the Venezuelan government that has Guyanese people supporting the Trump administration. Lord, make case come for your world. Many legal experts do believe that Guyana will win the border dispute. We just have a stronger case. But at the same time, Venezuela could pull a Russia and try to annex the Essequibo region by force. And so a lot of Guyanese are banking on the US's military to intervene on our behalf. Because really, the only thing saving us right now is the Pacaraima Mountains. In March of 2025, Guyana's President Ali and the U.S. Secretary of State cemented this commitment by signing an enhanced Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU.
Given Venezuela's unprovoked aggression towards Guyana, I want to know if your country would stand by Guyana militarily if Venezuela were to attack this country, and what would be the U.S.'s response should Venezuela attack U.S. oil major ExxonMobil, which is operating in Guyana's waters?
It would be a very bad day for the Venezuelan regime if they were to attack Guyana or attack ExxonMobil or anything like. It would be a very bad day, a very bad week for them, and it would not end well for them.
And while Rubio was in Guyana, he basically called us a shithole country. Marco Rubio got up there, told a whole lie about how China built this terrible road.
The problem is, in a lot of these countries, the Chinese companies go in, they do a terrible job. Not a bad job, a terrible job. I just came from Guyana where we had to drive on a road the Chinese built. Were you were on the trip with us?
Yeah.
Or okay, we almost all had concussions. It was terrible. They paid these people to build this road, and then they bring their workers. They bring their workers. They don't hire you. They bring their workers in to do all the work.
Are we willing to jeopardize our relationship with one of the biggest world leaders, China, in order to gain kudo points with the fascists in the U.S.? In August, Rubio made comments about narco traffickers saying, quote, "They are criminal enterprises that basically has taken control of national territory of a country, and who, by the way, are also threatening U.S. oil companies operating lawfully in Guyana." The key word here is U.S. oil companies. Let's hold on to that. So all of this is happening in the summer, and I remember, this is one of my observations. I remember waking up, listening to the radio, and there was an interview between one of the biggest radio hosts here in Guyana and a U.S. commander, where the U.S. commander was talking about narco traffickers, drug trafficking, and how traffickers are using Guyana as a way to get into the United States. In this interview, the commander made it clear that the snow is not made in Guyana, it just is passing through Guyana. And it doesn't even really stay here because, Guyanese people, we have El Dorado. What we want with snow? And the interviewer specifically asked the commander, so a lot of the narcotics and the snow that's going into the U.S. is coming from Venezuela. To which the commander had to correct him and say, well, actually, most of the drug trafficking going into the U.S. is actually coming from the Andes region. It's made in places like Bolivia and Peru, and it's trafficked through Colombia, up the Pacific, into Mexico, and then into the United States. Then the interviewer had to switch up and was like, okay, so it's actually not coming from Venezuela, okay. But the Venezuelan gangs, and they're like, yeah, the gangs, the terrorists, the narco-terrorists, yes, Tren de Agua. Like, y'all know Venezuela is not big meat when it comes to drug trafficking. Let's get back to the facts. In September of 2025, the U.S. did a low-pass flyover with a United States aircraft during the inauguration of the incumbent president, Irfan Ali. So many Guyanese celebrated the U.S. Air Force flying over the capital of Guyana. But me, as a U.S. American, knowing all of the things that the U.S. has done to other countries, because regardless of who is president of Guyana, we need to be very careful about the long-term ramifications and the legal precedent that we are setting when we allow the United States military to fly over your capital city. The long-term effects are going to outlive any president, any one of us, me and you included. On October 26th, there was a bombing of a mobile gas station on the east coast of Guyana. Several people had been injured and a young girl was killed during this attack. Mobil is a part of the ExxonMobil brand, the U.S. oil company. Now, remember when I said Rubio was talking about U.S. oil companies being threatened by Venezuela? So after this bombing took place, the entire country was looking for the suspect. And the main descriptor that was given was that this was a Venezuelan man. I prefer to ride the bus in Guyana because, one, y'all don't want me on these streets, okay? You want to see road rage? You think Guyana bad? I bad, okay? I ride the bus because you get to hear what people are talking about, what things people are worried about. You get a little update on the news and public information. Everyone in Guyana was talking about this Venezuelan man who bombed a gas station. Later, the police arrested 7 suspects, 4 of which were Venezuelan and 3 were Guyanese. Just a few weeks after Marco Rubio, Secretary of State in the U.S., says that these narco-terrorists are threatening U.S. oil companies in Guyana. Right on cue, there's a terrorist attack on a U.S.-owned gas station in Guyana. So you mean to tell me that 4 Venezuelans and 3 Guyanese found the ingredients and equipment to make a boom? Meanwhile, it's hard to find car parts for a Ford F-150 or a Nissan Altima. I'm not trying to downplay the severity of the situation. A little girl is gone. Someone needs to do something about this. Do we need U.S. soldiers patrolling the streets of the East Coast in order to ensure that U.S. oil companies are protected? Let's move on to Trinidad and our dear beloved Auntie Kamala. The Wall Street Journal reported Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Kamla Besesar is hosting U.S. warships and cheering strikes on alleged rugboats in a high-risk gamble. As you see, Auntie Kamla has been in talks with Maduro for a joint oil drilling operation that we can call Operation Dragonfield. The project would include drilling for oil in a shared location between both Trinidad and Venezuela. The project would also include a pipeline that carries gas to a platform that Shell, a U.S. oil company, operates on Trinidad's waters for processing and export. Oil and gas make up 40% of Trinidad's economy, and it brings in over 80% of the country's foreign currency. Now, for context, for a lot of developing nations, foreign currency is really important. A few months ago, I read an article about Trinidad's shortage of water barrels. Water barrels that are used to transport drinking water and potable water from one point to another. Now, the company that provides Trinidad's with these water barrels prefers to get paid in USD. But at the time, Trinidad was having a shortage of USD, and that trickled down into a shortage of a water supply. Trinidad's oil reserve only has about a decade left. So drill, baby, drill. Trinidad and the Venezuelans have been working on a deal for nearly a decade. During Donald Trump's first presidency, he put sanctions on Venezuela, barring any companies from working in Venezuela's energy industry, including Trinidadian companies. So the deals were halted until in 2023, the Biden administration granted Trinidad a special permit to continue with these talks. You see, at this time, the Ukraine and Russia war meant that a lot of European countries were not buying oil from Russia. So Biden, as an ally to Europe, wanted to open up other oil sources, including Trinidad and Venezuela. But when Trump got back in office around April, he said, fuck all that. He's not even trying to be allies with Europe anymore. And we saw the way he talked to the Ukrainian president. He ain't give a fuck about that. So in April of this year, Donald Trump said, I got a better idea. Regime change. So Auntie Kamla is basically betting that the Trump administration will successfully oust Nicolas Maduro. And then Trinidad will be able to get a better deal on the joint oil drilling project in the Dragon Fields. Now that's a big bet. That's a pretty ambitious bet. So how many Trinidadian lives are we placing on this bet? I'm just curious. Is it 2? So how can Trinidad, how can anyone, how can even the US know for sure that whatever new Venezuelan president, whatever regime replaces the Maduro regime, is going to automatically be better and more beneficial? There's this saying in the Caribbean, I think it's like, you run from the ghost and butt up with the jumbie. I think the English American equivalent would be like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Machado or any other Venezuelan leader is the devil we don't. Still, when the prime minister was asked about the U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, she said the U.S. military should kill them all violently. And she also added that she had no sympathy for drug smugglers. In this section, I'm calling it Small Axes for Big Trees. On October 26th, there was a National Day of Action across the Caribbean.
Today is that collective day of action, and I could report that there are people in Aruba, Barbados, Belize, Cuba, Curacao, Dominica, Grenada, Guadeloupe, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Republic of Dominica, Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, St. Martin, St. Vincent, Suriname, as well as us here in Trinidad and Tobago, who are doing something to make this collective call for the Caribbean to be a zone of peace.
Trinidadians have held several protests and vigils calling for peace, especially after 2 families in Trinidad believe that their relatives were killed by the recent U.S. airstrikes. Chad Charpo Joseph and Rishi Samaru from the fishing village of Las Cuevas in northern Trinidad are thought to be among the 6 people killed in a U.S. airstrike on a boat allegedly transporting snow from Venezuela. The Wall Street Journal spoke with the family of Chad Joseph, a 26-year-old Trinidadian whose relatives describe him as a fisherman and handyman desperate to find a steady job. Earlier this month, his relatives said Joseph told friends and family he was sailing home after visiting relatives and working as a farmhand in Venezuela. It was supposed to be an hour-long trip, but it was the last time that anyone heard from him. The family believes he was killed in one of the airstrikes that happened in October. Trinidad's Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Becesar, who has previously expressed strong support for a U.S. military operation in the region, avoided questions from reporters about the U.S. airstrike. It feels as if Joseph and Samaru were being treated as if they did not exist. And these airstrikes have a broader effect across the Caribbean. Trinidadian fishermen, as well as fishermen in Barbados and Grenada, are afraid to sail too far out from the coast. Activist David Abdullah, speaking for the Regional Executive Committee for the Assembly of Caribbean People, said, "The people of the Caribbean must stand firm against any attempt to drag us into war." A former Trinidadian Prime Minister and Energy Minister, Stuart Young, said, quote, "They've literally hitched their wagon under a very fast-moving train, and they're not sure what direction that train is heading." Remember I mentioned there was one survivor from Ecuador? Well, Ecuador released that survivor of the U.S. airstrike on a submarine. The Trump administration said that he was accused of smuggling snow in the Caribbean. But Ecuador's Attorney General office said there was no report of a crime and that there's no evidence or indication that could lead prosecutors or judicial authorities, essentially saying that the Trump administration gave them no details as to exactly what crime was being committed here. Ecuadorian officials also said that the man was in good health. On the contrary, the Colombian survivor is on a ventilator. Yet Colombia plans to prosecute him for drug trafficking because he was allegedly found on a drug boat. Now, it's not clear that Colombia has any more details than Ecuador. I think that Colombia takes a stronger stance against drug trafficking because Colombians are really tired of being associated with narcotics and snow. So historically, the Colombian president has no problems cooperating with the U.S. on joint drug trafficking operations. But that's not what's happening here, because it's not a ball. Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, accused the U.S. of killing an innocent fisherman in one of the airstrikes. In response, President Trump said that he would slash aid to Colombia. He also announced that all forms or subsidies to the country would be cut off. Colombia has been receiving over 700 million US dollars from the US for the past few years. But this year, that number dropped to $230 million. This is according to the Associated Press. Why would the US spend almost $1 billion in Colombia if they were not already addressing the drug trafficking? We know the U.S. does not give out aid for free. There's always strings attached. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has denied these accusations, and he said he will initiate legal proceedings against the U.S. for these illegal airstrikes. Let's move on to Grenada. The U.S. recently proposed to put a military radar base on the Maurice Bishop Airport in Grenada, which, for context, 50 years ago, the U.S. had this whole statement about how the airport this same airport is a civilian airport, and that the Grenadian government and their socialists were using this civilian airport for military operations with the socialists of Cuba. So now, 50 years later, the tables have turned and the turns are tabling. And they want to use the same, what they described as a civilian airport. They want to use it to put a military radar base so that they can track Venezuela. So I want to pull some quotes from this article in CaribbeanLife.com where they quoted Chester Humphrey, a Grenadian trade unionist and politician. He was the former president of the Senate in office between 2014 and 2022. Chester Humphrey says, "Let us be clear that the U.S., the American military buildup in the Southern Caribbean just off the Venezuelan coast, has absolutely nothing to do with the interdiction of drugs." Humphrey told local television anchor Callistra Ferrier. He states, "The Americans have had a history of lying regarding their intentions before going to war. Of recent vintage, it lies in respect of its invasion of Iraq. So, America has a long history of lying. It lied when it invaded Grenada, which we will get to." He continues, "The excuse is so flimsy that you are sending a massive flotilla into the Southern Caribbean to interdict drugs. You don't send a nuclear-armed submarine with missiles, several destroyers, and an entire fleet of F-116 aircrafts with advanced tomahawks to interdict fishing boats." One of the last times that the US military had this much of a presence in the Caribbean was when the US invaded and bombed Grenada. This section of the video I want to call Sankofa because I think it's important to go back and get historical context for other moments in history when the US's military intervention in the Caribbean jeopardized and sometimes lost innocent civilian lives. In 1974, the island of Grenada gained independence from the British, but they slowly fell into a dictatorship under Prime Minister Eric Gairy. Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement took over Grenada and ousted Prime Minister Gairy in a bloodless coup turned carnival fete. They not only celebrated, but in true Caribbean fashion, they had a little party. At this moment, US intelligence called this group a bunch of socialists who inherited a tropical slum. But these socialists got to work, together with local volunteers from the island, as well as inspired activists from around the world. Even some of the Black Panthers in the United States came to Grenada to help the country develop. Maurice Bishop and his socialist Marxist friends provided experts, and the average everyday citizen volunteered their labor, their hard-earned work, their bodies to build roads, to work in clinics, to educate both children and adults. And the outcome was miraculous. Water supply increased by 50% in the first 18 months of power. And electrification finally came to all of the villages of mainland Grenada. Unemployment dropped from 49% to just 14%. The per capita GDP grew. They provided home improvement grants and low-cost housing that benefited thousands. They set up universal medical care and dental care. School fees were abolished, and there was a mass campaign to increase the literacy rate in Grenada. It proved that with better resource management, Caribbean nations could develop themselves. This was a huge deal because Maurice Bishop and his comrades were young, they were Black, they were socialists, and they were English speaking. But for bigger projects like imports and exports, they needed outside investment. And those investments came from Fidel Castro and the Cuban government. The Cuban government provided 636 construction workers and advisors to make the Port Salinas airport a reality. In June of 1983, Maurice Bishop went to New York City to speak in front of a crowd of mostly Black and brown folks. He covered everything from the Palestinian struggle to Ronald Reagan's Medicaid cuts in the US. This speech shook the US government. Because here's a young socialist, again, young, Black, socialist, and English speaking. This was sure to have ripple effects not just in Grenada, not just in the Caribbean, but across the Americas, especially among Black Americans. But the Marxist theory that helped gain them support in the beginning became isolating for the average Grenadian citizen. The party was too focused on theory and not enough on practice. They expected people to be well versed in Marxist theory, or else they couldn't be official party members. This led to a lack of engagement as well as activist burnout. Eventually, there was an internal struggle for power. The political party tried to resolve this by splitting leadership three ways: between Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Crode, and the leader of the party, Unison Whiteman. But unfortunately, on the 13th of October 1983, Prime Minister Maurice Bishop was assassinated by his own party member and childhood friend, Bernard Crode, with the help of military leader Hudson Austin. This was so sad to read. It's like a Judas situation. So Hudson Austin took over the military and regained control of the island, moving forward with the socialist projects, including the construction of the airport with Cuba. In true U.S. fashion, the Reagan administration decides to kick them while they're down, pour salt in the wound, take advantage of this dire moment. Apparently, the United States has been rehearsing an invasion of Grenada since 1981. So on October 25th, 1983, the combined forces of the United States and the regional security system based in Barbados invaded Grenada in an operation codenamed Operation Urgent Fury. In 2023, Guyanese artist-activist Desmond Ali wrote a letter to the editor of Starbreak News that states, Reagan and his aides justified the invasion of Grenada with three arguments. First, they depicted the Grenada regime as murderous, anti-American, supported by Cuba. They said that they needed to protect the lives of the American medical students. After the invasion, it was found out that the students were not in danger. Third, they produced a letter signed by the Governor General of Grenada, Paul Schoon, requesting American intervention. It later turned out that the letter was actually written in Washington and delivered to Schoon to sign after the invasion had already begun. A senior British officer who watched the invasion from nearby Barbados, Major Mark Atkin, wrote afterwards that it was launched because of the intense desire of the president and his advisors to raise U.S. prestige, particularly at home and in the armed forces, where morale and self-respect had fallen substantially since Vietnam. So my interpretation of that last quote is that the United States invaded Grenada because they needed to boost morale, respect, and prestige after they lost the war in Vietnam. In total, 160 Grenadian soldiers and 71 Cubans were gone. Additionally, 24 innocent civilian lives were also lost, including 18 of which when the U.S. military mistakenly bombed a hospital. Another historical context I think we need to go back and get is the covert operation of Cubana Airlines Flight 455. On October 6, 1976, the U.S.-backed enemies of Cuba's socialist revolution, Luis Posada Carriles and Orlando Bosch, detonated 2 bombs on Cubana Airlines Flight 455. The flight had just left Venezuela, and it was making several stops in Caribbean islands before reaching its final destination of Havana, Cuba. After the plane took off from Barbados and it was on its way to Jamaica, all 73 people on board were killed, including young people from the Cuban fencing team, 11 people from Guyana, and 5 people from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Backed and supported by both the US and the CIA, Carriles and Bosch were anti-socialist, anti-Castro Cubans, and they continued to live their lives freely in Miami as the US refused to extradite them to either Cuba or Venezuela to face criminal charges. In this same year, the US and the CIA bombed a British West Indian Airways office in Barbados. And they also bombed the Guyanese embassy in Port of Spain, Trinidad, because they suspected cooperation with Cuba. Suspected must be the key word of this video. So here's the part in the video where I want to give mon opinion, as if I haven't been giving it this whole time. Outside of a few house slaves, I think the rest of the Caribbean, the rest of the Americas are very clear. We do not want any more US military bases. And the Caribbean and South and Central America should be a region of peace. I think that the governments of Trinidad and Guyana are going to have to be honest with themselves. What are you willing to give up in order to play this oil monopoly game? Unfortunately, I do believe that the US invasion of Venezuela is not only possible, it's imminent. And it's probably happening right now. Maduro has said that he wants peace. A piece of Guyana land. Let me calm down. Maybe it's not too late for CARICOM countries to back away from support for the US military intervention and engage directly in talks with Maduro. Or maybe it's already too late. Maybe the US Marines and the Air Force have already eaten up the Trinidadian doubles and the Guyanese curry. Once you feed them, they will never leave. I think that rich people and corporations like Trump and ExxonMobil, they know that the entire world has to shift away from fossil fuels and move into renewable energies. But instead of investing their time and money in that, they want to invest their time and money into hoarding the last bit of oil. My final point is that when the International Criminal Court of Justice decides to charge the Trump administration for war crimes, Marco Rubio needs to come to the motherfucking front. He should be the first to be indicted. Apparently, Marco Rubio, is the mastermind behind the airstrikes on the fishing boats. I believe that this administration needed to manufacture consent for these military actions by convincing Americans, and particularly their MAGA base of Republicans and conservatives, that attacking fishing boats in the Caribbean was their way of putting America first. They preyed on America's anxieties around fentanyl crisis and opioid epidemic. They used the war on terror rhetoric and tactics in order to get Americans to support these military actions. And guess what? It's not working. No one is believing their lies. A U.S. businessman with long-standing ties to Venezuela and close knowledge of the White House policy told the Guardian newspaper, Trump had, in many conversations, meetings with different people, emphasized that he only really cared about Venezuela's oil. But Rubio was able to drum up this narco-terrorist rhetoric and get Trump to pivot completely. The U-turn really reflects Rubio's expanded influence in the administration. So Trump may have been willing to work with Maduro, but it's Rubio who started this narco-terrorist rhetoric. Rubio and his papa are white Cubans whose family were exiled from Cuba after the country's Black and indigenous-led socialist revolution. So it kind of makes sense that Rubio would have this disdain for Venezuela. And it also makes sense that he would support Machado, Venezuela's opposition leader. Because like Rubio, Maria Machado is from an elite capitalist family within a country that turned socialist. And through that socialist transition, those capitalists lost money. Experts at the United Nations acknowledge Donald Trump's justification for the military action in Venezuela and the Caribbean. But they also said, even if such allegations were substantiated, the use of legal force in international waters without proper legal basis violates international laws of the sea and amounts to extrajudicial executions. In short, and to conclude this video, the U.S. does not get to play judge, jury, and executioner, not domestically and certainly not internationally. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please subscribe to my channel for more world news updates, travel vlogs, random cultural commentary. I will be sure to keep you updated as the US continues its bombing of fishing boats in the Caribbean. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about anything I've said, if you agree, if you're picking up what I'm dropping down. I will put all of the articles that I read, all of my citations in the description box below. My name is Jojo with the GoJo7 News. Always on the go, always working for you.